Greetings, everyone. I am Dr. Rochelle Gilbert, or Dr. Rowe, as most people call me, and I'm the Dean of Student Affairs. I am so honored to have this opportunity to be a part of the inspiring work happening right here at Walden U. But more specifically, I am motivated by all of the diverse programs, services, and leadership opportunities that we afford you, our Walden students, at our Walden. So, our goal is to provide resources that assist you in identifying, clarifying, and achieving your personal education goals in and outside of the classroom. So, guess what? We're dedicating to working for you, supporting you, and ensuring that you have experiential initiatives, opportunities, and an environment that not only educates you, but empowers you and makes sure that you're engaged. So, this evening's professional development session is going to do just that, enlighten you about career planning and development, skills, and resources by building a resume. We are committed to the idea that every experience at Walden is an element of keeping to our mission of social change. So we're privileged to be a university where leaders in service are educated accordingly, and those leaders are you. So enjoy our session tonight, and remember, we are Walden.
Hello, everyone. I am Dina Berggren. And before we get started today, let's review a few virtual meeting tips for today's workshop. First of all, remember to mute your microphone. Be mindful of background noise. Limit distractions and multitasking during the workshop. Be concise when speaking. Use the chat feature to ask questions throughout the session. Use the raise your hand feature during the Q&A and wait to be recognized. And finally, select the speaker view for most activities unless stated otherwise. And now on to a few Zoom housekeeping tips. First of all, click on the camera icon to share or stop your video. Click on the microphone icon to mute and unmute. Click on the people icon to see who is currently in the meeting. And click on the message icon to access the chat. You can say hello to all attendees or ask questions of our presenters. And as a reminder, please stay on mute for the duration of the presentation unless otherwise directed. If you experience any technical issues, we recommend leaving and rejoining the meeting. And the presentation slides will be provided at the end of the event. Now, I'd like to hand it over to Senior Career Advisor Denise Pranke to introduce our department and lead us into our topic.
Thanks, Dina, and hello, everyone. I am so happy that you all are able to join us. I'd like to start by pointing out that if you are familiar with career services, you will notice that we recently had a name change to career planning and development. We feel this name more accurately describes what we do for both students and alumni. Before we go into our topic for the session, I want to share some general information about the career planning and development resources that are available for you. So in addition to a number of resume resources that we'll go over in more detail later in the session, our website also offers resources on career exploration, networking, creating a LinkedIn profile, job search, interview preparation, and a lot more. We also share career tips and motivational posts on our LinkedIn group, Twitter, and Facebook. If you're not sure where to start, there's a short questionnaire on the homepage that you can complete to generate a custom list of resources tailored to your needs. And finally, you also have the option of scheduling a one-on-one appointment with a career services advisor if you like. And I recognize some of your names of those of you who are attending. So I'm so excited to see you attending the session. So next, we would like to know more about our audience. So we have a poll question for you. Please choose the answer that best describes you. I am interested in creating or updating my resume because I am transitioning to a new career field, seeking career advancement in my current field, searching for a similar job to my current or recent position. Not sure what I want to do next, but want to have an updated resume. Okay.
While we wait for everyone to answer the poll, we do have a question in the chat that I believe would probably interest most of the people here. With the different services that you had mentioned, there was a question of if there's any fees for those services.
Oh, Caroline, thanks. That's a great question. No, there is not. All of those resources that I mentioned are free. One-on-one appointments are free. We serve both current students at any point in their program and alumni with no endpoint. All those resources are available. We might have some links to a few things that there might be a small fee that, but nothing that we have on that, that is ours on that website. There's no fee.
Thank you.
Thanks. So it looks like we have 33% transitioning to a new career field and 33% seeking career advancement. So really split. And then searching for a similar job to your current or recent position. So there's a handful of you who are in that position, and 22% are not sure exactly, where you want to go next, but you want to have an updated resume. So if an opportunity arises. So great. We're going to have we'll cover some resources for all of you. And so next, let's see, we're going to go over our workshop goals. So what we want to do during the session is we want to examine the purpose of a resume, explore what makes a strong versus a weak resume, and guide you through steps to start building or updating your own resume. We're going to provide additional resume resources and a copy of the PowerPoint later in the presentation. And you'll have an opportunity to share with other participants in a breakout room activity. And we're going to answer as many questions as possible that you have. Next, we're going to kick off the start of the resume workshop content with a poll question for you. So Dina's going to launch a poll. So which statement do you think is correct here? So my resume should be generic so that it shows my basic qualifications for as many different jobs as possible. My resume should be tailored to show I qualify for the job requirements of my target position. So which one of those two do you think is correct? Oh, great. So you are right on the mark here with 100% saying my resume should be tailored to show how I qualify for the job. You are absolutely right. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this on the next slide. So absolutely, you are right. Your resume is your marketing document. It should clearly and concisely describe who you are as a professional and show not only that you are qualified, but that you are one of the best qualified candidates. So you get invited for that interview. You want to stand out among the qualified candidates. It's not just enough to show that you're qualified, but you need to be one of the top qualified. And you do that by tailoring your document to the position. So put yourself in that shoes of that recruiting or hiring manager. They have that position to fill. So your application will stand out by having that organized, polished resume that's tailored to meet those qualifications. So you are absolutely right about that. And then also, you might want, because of that, you might want to consider having more than one resume. So for example, if someone is in a master's in education program and they're looking for either a classroom teaching position or an educational administrative position, those two resumes would be similar, but they are going to emphasize different things. So for some of you, if you're in a job search where you're searching for some different types of positions, consider, having a few different resumes. Also, you may want to keep a master or running resume that lists all of your experiences and accomplishments, and then use that master resume to create a resume tailored to your job target. So next, let's briefly go over the main sections of the resume. So on our next, so at the top of the document, you want a header with your contact information, then a short summary of your qualifications, and that could be 3 to 6 sentences or 3 to 6 bullet points, or maybe a combination of both. Next is either your experience or your education sections with the content in reverse chronological order. Most recruiters and hiring managers prefer this reverse chronological format with a description of what you accomplished in each position versus a functional format that lists your skills and accomplishments separate from the employer. So for those of you, quite a few of you who are making a career transition, we typically advise putting your education section just below your summary, because that's your strongest qualification for the job. Next, add additional sections such as volunteer experience and professional affiliations. Also, if you have relevant volunteer experience, be sure to add a volunteer section. Don't underestimate the value of including your volunteer experience. And many of you also may want to include a technology section. Remember, this is all about telling your professional story and drawing the recruiter or hiring manager's attention to your strongest qualifications for the job. We often get the question, what is the difference between a resume and a CV or a curriculum vitae? So in many countries, these terms are interchangeable, but in the US, they are considered different documents. The main differences are length and focus. A resume should be limited to 2 pages, while a CV can be much longer and is focused more on your academic accomplishments, such as professional presentations and publications. And also a CV is typically used by master's and doctoral students interested in higher ed teaching, consulting, or research positions. There's a lot of overlap between the two documents. So much of what we discuss here in this session is applicable to both documents. So keep in mind that there isn't only one right way to do this, but there are best practices. So on the next slide, we're going to take a look at some of those best practices. So both the format and content are important. When formatting your document, one of the key things you want to keep in mind is be consistent. Use a 14 to 18 point font size for your name and 11 to 12 point font size for content. With some fonts, like for Dana, you could get away with maybe a 10 point font, but for most, 10 point is going to be just too small. You want to stick to common font styles such as Calibri, Arial, Verdana, Garamond, Times New Roman. Keep your margins between 0.7 to 1 inch and minimize the use of color. A little bit of color is fine, but you want to minimize that use of color. And for job search in the US, Do not include a photo on your resume. Use bold, italicize, and bullet points, but avoid overusing these features or your document will look cluttery. Keep the length to no more than 2 pages. There may be rare cases where 3 pages is okay, but that would be an exception. You really want to try to stick to 2 pages. And your content, again, should focus on your qualifications for your target job. As you know, as you said in the poll, you are aware of that. So that is great. Use keywords from the job description for your industry. Keep in mind that you don't need to meet 100% of the qualifications, but you do want to showcase those areas where you have a match for the requirements. And then when describing your experience, include accomplishments, not just a list of duties and responsibilities. And if possible, quantify your accomplishments to describe the scope of what you did. If you're looking to advance into a leadership position, be sure to show where you took on a leadership role to complete projects, solve problems, and make decisions. And a number of you indicated that you are interested in advancing. So that is one of the reasons that you're pursuing your degree, is to advance in your current profession. So look at, if you're not in a leadership position now, still look for those opportunities to take on a leadership role or showcase where you took initiative to solve a problem, where you stepped up. And then include examples of both your hard skills and soft skills. So, for example, a nurse has the hard skills of knowing how to operate and read medical equipment, give injections, use electronic medical record systems, among many other hard skills. But they also have the soft skills of active listening, interpersonal communications, sympathy, empathy, the ability to prioritize, and the skill of collaborating across multiple disciplines. We all have both hard and soft skills in varying degrees. So include examples of both as you craft your resume. Think about those 2 areas. And then moving on, also on your document, avoid using personal pronouns like I, me, and my. It's just not necessary. This document's really all about you. So you don't need to use those personal pronouns. And then if you think, oh, I did this with other people, it really wasn't me, that's okay. Just put collaborated with team members and put that accomplishment down. Start bullet points with action verbs. Use present tense for your current positions and past tense for past positions. And then finally, double and triple check your spelling. So next, do we have any questions, Caroline, before we jump into the activity?
We do have a couple questions that came in, and I believe that the first one may have been answered after it was posted, but in case you would like to elaborate on it, we have the question of, should we have core strengths if we are changing careers?
Should we have core strengths? Is that what, like
a section on the resume of core strengths?
Sure, you could have those. You'd want to have them related to your new position. So often you might think of those as transferable skills, and Katie's going to go into that more when she actually walks you through the steps. So those transferable skills, you do want to think about, if you're making that transition, okay, from your past experience, what are those skills, both hard and soft, that transfer to something else? Maybe you've done something with technology. It might not be exactly the same, but we all know, the more you use technology, the easier it is to learn something new. So, so yes. And if you're wondering, like, does it make sense? Should I put this on, especially for those of you who are career transitioners and many others on here, if you're not sure, take advantage of the one-on-one appointments with us as well. Also, it's a good idea to have someone that maybe take a look at your resume and do a review of it. Sometimes that's also helpful. But yes, core strengths would absolutely be great to have, or sometimes it's titled, you know, core competencies or a competency section as well. Absolutely.
Fantastic. Our next question is in relation to years of experience. So how far back should experience be included on the resume?
Okay, that's a great question. Go back approximately, rule of thumb kind of is 10 to 15 years. But there can be some exceptions to that. Sometimes I'm working with a student and maybe they have something that's really relevant, that's a little further back. For example, someone might have a bachelor's degree in psychology, and then they've worked in that field. They went on, they got maybe a MBA, they've been working in business, and now they're going back. They want to kind of return to that field of psychology. And so there might be something from further back that might be helpful, but generally 10 to 15 years, kind of more, keep it more current.
Fantastic, thank you. And then another question that we have in the chat is to clarify what the name is of the perfect font to use.
Okay, we are going to, a little later, we have a document to share, and we have 2 articles that list those fonts, but common ones are, you know, Times New Roman, Calibri, Arial, Garamond, Palantino, Verdana. Those are, you know, the more common ones, but we have 2 articles on the resource sheet that we're going to share that both share, you know, some of the more common fonts. You don't want to get really creative with the font because they might not be able to read it, or Katie's going to talk a bit about that too. It might go through a system where it gets a little wonky if you use something that's not common. Yeah, Garamond, Verdana, yeah, those are great. Times New Roman is a really common one as well. So yeah, just stick to those more common type of fonts. So, okay.
And Denise, I
Yes.
just included the resource list in the
chat.
you
did? Oh, great. Thanks,
so
Tina.
That resource list has the articles that you referred to.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's go to the next slide, and we have an activity for you. So here, what we're going to do here is let's take a look at Tamara's resume and let's give her some guidance. So using the chat, share some ideas on where she can improve her resume. So, and let's see if Caroline, if you can share those with me.
Absolutely. So far we have general formatting.
Right. Yes. Yeah. If we look at her summary is formatted differently from her education, from this section on certifications, and then public health experience. So here, you know, this is underlined, different fonts, this is all caps. So yeah, absolutely. Great point.
So more specifically, we have to align the years.
Right. And that is another really good point. Look at this over here. Then what happens is the document doesn't look as polished as you want it to look, right? When those dates are not lined up. Also, there isn't any lining up here. Look at this. She might be better off using bullets. She could go either way. Bullets are or a paragraph, a short paragraph, but bullets are a little bit easier.
Absolutely. Then more with the formatting, we have to center the word summary and take out the underline.
Right. And that summary is not, yes, absolutely. Thank you.
It's also mentioned for the alignment in general. Another more specific one is to take the table out and make it the bullet section.
Yes, tables are not the best to use in the resume for reasons that Katie's going to go over. So those systems that a lot of larger companies and even now many smallers use, they don't pass through those systems well. Katie's going to go into a lot more detail about that. But so I definitely take it out of the table, but also look, you know, this person has the table and here's a blank spot. So it's kind of like, well, did she have enough to fill the whole table? And then there's SPS. Now, we know what that is, but when she's applying for a job, they might not know what SPS is. That's that statistical software.
Absolutely. It looks like that was a popular one. Lots of comments on the table and the bullet points in the chat.
Yeah, great. This is, yes.
It's also mentioned,
fantastic.
it's also mentioned that that to use one, maybe two fonts.
Right. And that's great as well. You don't want a bunch of different fonts. No, especially for the same thing. You can see she has a different font for education, versus summary. That just doesn't give the document that polished look that you're going for, right? There's also a spelling error here, and it's right here. And it's sometimes it's right here. It's certifictions, and it's so easy to miss. We work with a lot of students and go over their resumes, and experience also is a common one with the I and the E transposed, but it's easy to miss those. That's why it's helpful just to even have a friend or a family member kind of proofread your document for you. It's hard for us to proofread our own work.
Absolutely. And some of our participants did pick up on that. So that's great.
Okay, great.
And also the use of community outreach efforts as a fragment.
Right. Yeah. What does that's down here, right down here, this community outreach efforts right there. What about that? That's that. And then the use of the I used, and then media is capitalized, webinars is capitalized, and videos is capitalized, and they don't need to be or shouldn't be. Also, she has up here, managed a team of 24 customer service reps for MTD. But when the reader first is reading this, they don't know what is MTD? They're wondering about that. So she also has like public health professional, great. Program evaluations, quality improvement, statistical analysis. It's kind of a list, but it's in this bulleted or not in a bulleted format. It probably would be better in a different format without just in a list of so many different things here.
And we actually have a few more questions that came in in relation to this.
Okay.
One is regarding if you need to have your address at the top of the resume.
That's another really good question. That used to be much more standard, and now it is not so standard. As long as you have like your city and state, you don't need the street address. I would recommend putting the city and the state, and I get that recommendation straight from a recruiter. She said when she doesn't see a location, she typically passes the resume over. She wants to know where the person is. So, city and state like Minneapolis, Minnesota would be fine here, maybe with a zip code. I would include the zip code because, again, those systems that sometimes they're programmed to look for certain zip codes. And if you're in that zip code, you want them to know that. And sometimes if it's not there, then they just don't look at all. So yeah, that great question. Anything else?
There's another question that came up from a few different participants, and it's relating to how to structure a resume after having whether a gap in employment from just the pandemic or from raising children. Perhaps you'll be addressing this later, but that is a question that's come up a few times now.
Yeah, I'll address that. Because of the pandemic, so many people will have a break in their employment. New employers are not going to really be concerned about that. That's the advice that I've seen when I'm reading what recruiters are saying and hiring managers are saying. They know that this has been a major disruption. If you've been, let's say, taking care of a family member, children or elderly family member or ill family member for years, that gets a little tricky, but a lot of you are working on your education. So you really want to prioritize that work on the education that you have, in your cover letter, really highlight your education. And so, we step in and out of the workforce, especially women do, but now more and more men are doing the same thing, caring for family members. And so I wouldn't worry about it. What I would do though is really hone in on your academic credentials, what you're learning in your academic program, and then look for some, you know, if you volunteered in some way, maybe you were raising children and you were involved in their school, you know, definitely prioritize that volunteer section. So that would be my advice. Sometimes you'll see advice to have more of a functional resume. I still think that they typically prefer that chronological resume. So, you know, but you might want to just prioritize it with maybe some sections, a section of your academic coursework and major academic projects might be a way to get around that. And I do see a question or a comment about the safety issue in terms of the address. And that's a really good point. Like if you're going to post your resume out on Indeed.com, definitely would not include your street address in that case. And so I see a question about templates. We are going to share some templates in the breakout room. And so I think at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Katie to walk us through the steps of building a high impact resume. So Katie.
Thank you, Denise.
And I am going to remember to clear the, there we go. Thank you. So it's Katie, it's over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, everyone. For the next 20 or so minutes of our presentation today, I'd like you all to open up the template that Dina is adding to the chat if she has not already. So you'll want to save a copy of the template to your desktop in order to open it. So during this next section, we're going to take that resume that Denise talked about in that last activity and work on a better version of it, one that is more consistent and more high impact. So I'll give you a few seconds to go ahead and open up that template, and I will do that as well. Okay, let's make sure I can still see it as I move it around. All right, can you see it? Thumbs up.
We can see it, Katie.
Perfect, thank you. All right, so we're going to take this template that you all have, and I am going to take, like I mentioned, the resume that Denise worked on with you, and I'm going to make it into this template. So you can follow along with your own information if you would like to start building your resume, and we'll kind of talk through it section by section. So first, I want to talk about this template in particular and what makes this a good template so that you can be on the lookout if you're looking for other templates. So one thing is it's very consistent. You can see that everything lines up. All of the dates line up on the right-hand side. There is a minimal use of bold, so you can see that only the headers are bolded, the titles, the company names, and these might be things that you can also adjust. And you'll see that, I'll adjust it here. So it's not every other thing that's bolded. There's not too much bold. There's not too much italicized. So you want to use those things to emphasize things in your resume, but you also want to keep it at a minimal so that that does emphasize it. If you emphasize everything, you've emphasized nothing. So this also has a good margin of somewhere between 0.7 to 1 inch. Make sure that it's consistent on all sides. And it also right now is 1 page, but as you add content, it may expand into 2 pages. So that's one reason that we really like this template. It also sets you up for success with an action verb, more details, and a reason, outcome, or qualified results. So let's take a look at the header. So we're going to add in Tamara's name. So one thing we want to look out for is that this is a good font size. So right now it's 16, so it stands out. It's the biggest thing on the resume. That is what you want. So then we'll add in her phone number, her email. Now, one thing about the email address, you want to use a professional email address or your Walden student email address. You don't want to use a work email address. This is not the time to do that. So make sure that your email address that you're using is something you are going to check consistently and is professional. It doesn't have to be your name, just not something silly. So here again, it has location, city, state, and zip code. So we did not add in her entire street address. We just have Minneapolis, Minnesota, 55401. And then you can also add in your LinkedIn, a professional website, or a portfolio. If your field requires a portfolio, some of the more artistic, design, IT type professions might want a portfolio. That's something you can add straight onto your resume. And this would be a great place to put it. So I'm going to pause here. And Caroline, are there any outstanding questions so far?
Thank you. We did have one question just to clarify of wouldn't you lead a bullet with the quantified results first before telling what you did?
You want to start with that action verb because an action verb is your skill. So when you're talking about an action verb, it's going to show whether you led something. So did you manage it? Did you collaborate with somebody? Did you administer something? Were you teaching someone? Look at those action verbs because that's going to say the skill. And then you can lead into the details of what you did when you were managing or what you managed. So add that detail kind of in the middle.
There's also a question regarding having many roles. So the question is that someone has had many roles in their professional organization. Should they include them all?
That's a great question, and we will kind of come to that with this template. So you'll see kind of an example of how to include that. But one thing you can do is lead with that company name and then list each role underneath with the bullet points for that specific role. So if you're currently a manager, list those bullet points underneath manager that is specific to that role. Then if you came from, say, customer service and you did that a couple years ago, still with the same company, add that down below with bullet points about that position. So that way you can show that you have grown within your company and also show what's different. If you lump them all together, it's really hard for a hiring manager or a recruiter to distinguish what is it that you're doing now versus what you've done in the past.
Fantastic. We also have a question, if you could provide some good action verbs or action words to use to describe accomplishments.
Oh yes, we have a great resource on our website just for that, and we will show you exactly where that is later. But trust me, it's a great resource.
Fantastic, thank you. Another question is, should you include your volunteer organization work in the same manner?
It depends. So if your volunteer experience is relevant, I would absolutely include it like this with your title such as volunteer, and I didn't need to do that. With the action verbs, the accomplishment statements, all of that information, especially if it's relevant. If it's not as relevant, you don't have to do all of the detail.
Wonderful. In the same relation, if someone is applying for a job in the States and has out-of-country experience, I believe the answer would be similar to that, but do you have any tips for what they should include?
I would still include all of your experience and your accomplishments. I hope that's what you're asking, but I would still include all of those transferable skills, absolutely.
And another question of for credentials, should people include all of their credentials? And should it be at the top with their name, or how should it be listed?
Great question. So say with this person, and we'll kind of get to this as we build out this resume here in a second. So this Tamara has not yet completed her master's degree. So she cannot include MPH under her name, but she can include it in her education, which I'll show you here in a second. So after you have completed a credential, you can include it behind your name. If you have not yet completed it, if you've not gotten that email of conferred, you cannot add it yet. All right, so let's move along a little bit. So here we also have the professional summary. This is definitely an area that I always recommend students to add. This is if you only had a few seconds to tell your potential employer about you, what would you want them to know? If they were not going to read the rest of your resume, what do you want them to know? So Tamara wants them to know that she is a public health professional who has done program evaluations, quality improvement, statistical analysis, has customer service skills, is a team player, communication, and is completing her MPH in public health internship. So these are the things she wants to focus on. So make sure that when you are telling them about yourself in that professional summary, that you give them details. Okay, so let's move on a bit. All right, so with the skills, and this is one way of listing the skills. This is not the only way to list skills. So she has as advanced Microsoft Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, and intermediate SPSS. She doesn't have any expert skills yet, so we can take that off. So oftentimes with a template, you'll see parts that maybe you don't have, and that's okay. You can just take them off. You don't have to panic and think, I can't use this template. This is not for me because I don't have that. Make it your own. That's the most important thing about a template, is to make it your own and stand out, because if they all look the same, it's boring to read. So you want to really stand out. Okay, so let's take some questions.
Wonderful. So we have had some more questions that seem to relate to the same theme we've had earlier of, if you have so many qualifications for different positions. One specifically that came in was for a technology coaching job. Technology can be vast, and so should they list all of the sites and the software that they know, since it could all apply as a technology coaching role?
It's a great question. So one thing you can do is to kind of cut down on that so that you don't have a sea of technology skills, is to tailor it to what that position is. So look at that job. So say we're talking technology. If it is focused more on software, make sure you list the software tools that you know. If it's focused more on hardware or databases, focus it on that. And you can even say, instead of just skills, you could say select skills, so that they know these are not your only skills, but these are the skills you're going to tell them. Your resume is a marketing document. You do not have to think of it as an autobiographical document that lists everything, because that can be overwhelming. So pick and choose what is most important to that next job. If it's not important to that next job, don't worry about including it. You can also include that in your cover letter of, on my resume, I have selected 20 different tools that I am very knowledgeable of, but there are a vast majority that I did not list. So, you can always have that conversation of, these are some things that I chose to list, but there's more, and we can talk about that in an interview. And that can be a great invitation to an interview.
Fantastic. And also relating to the skills, do you have any guidance for how you can determine whether they're expert, advanced, intermediate? Is it based on the years of schooling or other references?
There's no hard and fast rule unless it's, Excel, where there are different levels. So if you feel fairly confident with a tool, you can at least say that you're intermediate. If you're still learning it, I would not put intermediate, I'd maybe put basic. But if you know the ins and outs of the tool and how to make it work in every way, then you obviously you'd be an expert. So it really is not a hard and fast rule. It's how you feel about using it. If you were just handed a task and said, go do it.
Wonderful. I think we're all caught up in the chat as for now.
Perfect. All right. Let's keep going. All right. So one thing I am going to do with this template is, and one thing I love about templates that are easy to maneuver is, I think Tamara, her most relevant experience is part of her education. So I'm going to take her education section and move it here under the skills section. I'm also going to duplicate this so that we can include all of her education. So first, we want to include her Master of Public Health, because this is the most current education. Then we're going to move it back over there, which is always fun. So you always want to have your most recent education first and go backwards in reverse chronological order. So then we're also going to include her Bachelor of Science in Biology. I will fix that here in a minute. Now, one thing you'll notice that I did was I changed the dates to not be bold. So down here, the dates are bolded, but I changed them to unbold them because, and you'll see why here when I start adding in the experience, it felt like there was too much bold across one line. So that is a stylistic choice that you can make. Kind of look at your document, see how it looks. Can you distinguish things? And if it's a little difficult, change something to emphasize what you want. So in this case, I wanted to emphasize her degree title. That is the most important thing, is that degree title. So I chose to make that bold. Another thing I want to point out is that I did not include a start date. So maybe she started in August of 2019, but I'm not including that because that's not what's important. The most important is when she's going to finish her degree. So she's letting that potential employer know, I'm not done yet, but I'm going to be done next month. So she's almost done. So that's what's important, is when are you going to finish? And if you're not quite sure when you're going to finish, doctoral students run into this all the time. They're not quite sure. Chat with your student success advisor and they can help you estimate. And an estimate is perfectly fine. If something changes, that's okay. So I also have just the month. I don't have the exact date. Same thing with this one. All right, let's see. And if she could add her GPA if she has a high GPA. If it's lower, so if it's more around a 3.0 or if she's not doing so well in her current program and she has a 2.7, that's not something you want to add. You want to add it if it's high. I'd say around 3.6 and above is a good one to add. So I'll take any questions related to that.
You must have done a fantastically thorough job. It looks like one just popped up. I spoke too soon there. And they apologize to go back if it was covered, but is there a reason that health professional statistical analysis are capitalized under professional summary?
I think that's just how we had it, but you don't have to, so.
Fantastic. And then another question that just came in is, where would you put a GPA?
Great question. So if you wanted to highlight a GPA, you could put it right there. And a lot of students will ask, especially say that she finished even farther back than 2010. They say, I don't remember my GPA for my bachelor's degree. And that's okay. You don't have to include that one. If you want to just include your most recent one, that's okay too.
Is there a time limit for how far back you should go with the GPAs? For example, if someone had graduated from Walden in 2009.
Nope, there's really no time limit. It's just up to you on whether you want to include that.
Fantastic. And then to revisit about the credentials question, if there's such a BSN, is that something that you would put behind your name, or would you leave it here in the education?
You can add a BSN if you would like to. Some bachelor's degrees don't, most of them don't, but especially nursing, because that is tied very closely to a credential, an outside credential, you could add that one. It's kind of a choice.
Another question regarding GPA is if someone should include if they are Latin honors. So if they're the summa cum laude or cum laude, or should they just include GPA?
Yeah, if you have that for your bachelor's degree, you can absolutely add that. So you could say, 3.7, I'm going to get this wrong, summa cum laude, something like that, you could. Master's degrees, you won't see that, so you won't want to add that for a master's degree or a doctoral degree. It's only for bachelor's.
How about if there's an honor society?
That's a great question. That you could add in a separate section for professional affiliations or affiliations, memberships, whatever you're calling that section, that's probably where I would put that.
And what about a specialization? For example, a master's of clinical mental health counseling, specializing in trauma and crisis.
Yep, you can absolutely add that. So you could do, let me go this way. And forgive me, I'm not sure what the specializations are for the MPH, so we'll just leave that there. Okay, all right. Let's move on to probably the most important section, which is the experience. So we're going to start off with her internship. So first, she was a public health intern, Environmental Protection Agency for Region 1. And she did that from April to October of 2020. And this is why I separated the bold and did not do the bold for the dates, because this line became very long and it made it very hard to see. So now here we have our action verb, what you did with more detail, and the reason, outcome or quantified results. So we start with an action verb. She collaborated with the EPA staff of the Pesticides Division to develop, implement, and monitor the program. Now, the reason kind of also fits in here, to monitor, to develop, implement, and monitor this particular program. So sometimes your details and your results will kind of blend, and that's okay. So don't think you always have to have a number or a specific, this was the result. Sometimes they blend, and that's okay. So another one here. She created and prepared materials using communications tools and activities for community outreach. Now, one thing you could do here is what kind of communications tools? That would be a great thing to add in. So maybe she used such as Microsoft Teams or the Adobe Suite. Those are details you can add in directly into that bullet point to really help it stand out. So here she even has 2 action verbs, created and prepared. So that's one way you can talk about multiple things and multiple skills. Another one here is consulted with stakeholders and built relationships, partnerships, and strategic alliances to better serve the community. Now here's a really good one for showing that result. So consulted with stakeholders, and she built relationships, partnerships, and strategic alliances. That's the details, what she did to better serve the community. Why is that important? To better serve her community. Okay, so now this is also already much better than the non-paragraph that we saw during Denise's activity. So now what I also want to do is show you a little bit about how you can talk about relevant experience while also highlighting that information, even if something's farther back. So you notice here that these dates are April to October of 2020. So this is over. This is not her current position. So what if she already has a position that is full-time that she's still doing? Now this might not be, go back over. So this is to present, but we want this information to be highlighted. So what we can do is split this section. And then sometimes Word is not my friend. Additional experience. This is an easy way to get around that chronological order so that you can include information that's farther back, higher up on your resume. So especially with teaching experience or your volunteer experience, you can rearrange things to highlight what you want. So here she has this position that's at St. Paul Family Medical Practice. So one thing you'll also notice here is with that public health experience, because it ended in 2020, all of these are past tense because they were done in the past. Whereas this one, recruit, train, and manage all clinical staff, is present tense because she's still doing it. So that is one thing you'll want to make sure you include in your resume, is to make sure you have all of your tenses correct. And then we will add in so you'll notice this one is also, and I remember somebody asked this earlier, how do you show that growth within a company? This is one way to do it. If you have everything on one line, then you can include everything just like this, to where you can tell that each of these positions are different, but it's with the same organization. So it's still showing that growth. Another way you could do it is if you had, say, that there with the title here, and then moved this right underneath, it still shows that growth. So it shows that both of these are here, but they're in their separate positions. Okay, now I know there must be questions here.
There certainly are. I think that you just addressed one of them. That was a question from a few of our attendees of how to describe different positions at the same role, and also if it is with a break in years. So I believe you just went over that, which is fantastic. Another question we had is there a maximum number of actions that you can list under each experience?
It's a great question. So if your experience is more recent or relevant, I would include more. So right now, just for the sake of a workshop, we only have 3 for each one. But if you have a very relevant experience or it's your current position, you could go say maybe 6 to 8. Usually 8 is a pretty good number, and you can include that many. As you go farther back or to positions that are not relevant at all, you can take them off. So this one, this certified medical assistant, if she only wanted to include the title without any of the bullet points, she could do that. That is something you can do for experiences that are farther back or definitely not relevant.
Wonderful. Another question that we had is if, for example, you're doing a similar job but in different environments, such as if you have experience as an administrative role, but in different companies, how would you highlight doing the same type of administrative work but at different companies without being repetitive?
Great, that's a great question. So one thing you could do is highlight what is different about that environment. So say that you have, like you mentioned, an administrative role, one's in a corporate environment, one's at a nonprofit. Talk about how what you do is supporting the mission. Talk about what that environment is. So serve as an administrator in a corporate office with, serving bankers. I don't know. And then for the other one, serve as an administrator in a nonprofit organization with a mission of focusing on social change. Right there, you've already shown what's different about that environment and how you can be flexible and still work in both while doing similar things. So not everything has to be that way, but you want to kind of focus it a little bit.
Perfect. I think that also answered another question that we had, which was regarding different positions within the same company, but also in other companies that are similar. I believe that answers that as well.
Awesome.
And then we did have a question of, should I list older jobs that might align with the new career or just current jobs? And I believe that was answered with, you can go back as far as 15 years as the guide.
Awesome. All right, let's finish this one off. So a lot of people have already been asking about this. There is another section or a couple of other sections, depending on what your experience is. Either awards, recognitions, volunteer work, can also be certifications. So especially for those of you who are nurses or social workers or, counselors, anyone that has a certification, you can add those in. And the way you want to do that is very simple. So CPR certification, the American Red Cross, in 2013. So include what the certification is, who granted it, and when. So some of them, it could be when it expires, could be when it was granted. Different certifications have different kinds of dates to include. So whatever is correct for that particular certification, include that, just specify. So it could be, this one could be 2022, and it could be expires 2022, something like that. All right. Any final questions?
So with the certifications, is that the same with any publications?
Great question. I would do a separate section for any publications and list those publications in APA format.
Wonderful. And is there a limit for certifications such as regional, or does it really just matter if it applies to the position?
Just matters if it applies to the position.
And the last question that came in was, if there are a lot of different publications or professional development, is it better just to list it out or to provide a link for a website?
I would say select publications and then talk about it in your cover letter. Maybe you have a portfolio, maybe you have a website that links to those. That would be where I would list all of them.
And another one that came in that's regarding licensure, is it necessary to include any license numbers?
Kind of depends on what your particular license does. I have seen some that include numbers. That's kind of up to you and what's important for an employer to have.
And how about if you had a certification that applies to the job, but it has expired? How should you reference that, if at all?
Great. You could include, say that it expired 2021 or 2020. Let's go 2020. You could include that and then talk about, if you are, actively looking to, trying to think of what word I want to use, renew it, then you could mention that. All right. Thank you, Caroline, for taking all of those questions. I'm sure we will have more questions towards the end, but we do need to move on. So let me go back to our PowerPoint. All right. So let's do a quick poll. Dina, if you would launch that for me. So on average, how many resumes are received for a posted corporate job opening, according to an article in Forbes? 50 to 75, 80 to 125, or over 150. And obviously this will vary depending on the level of the position, but how many do you think? All right, do we have any results yet?
We do. We currently have the overwhelming response of 77% says over 150.
Nice, awesome. So actually what we've found is it's almost 250. So that's a lot of job applications for one position. So as many of you know, after you submit your resume for a position, it's likely to be read by a computer before it is read by a person. And these systems are called applicant tracking systems, or ATS. And companies use these systems to manage their incoming applicants, sort them, and rank them by perceived fit. So while you definitely want to make sure that your resume is appealing to a person, you also want to make sure that it is appealing to the computer system. So the first step is to keep your formatting simple. So fancy formats, images, shapes will not be translated by the computer system. And that makes sense, but some other less obvious formatting is also difficult to read by ATS systems, such as tables, boxes, and sometimes columns. And those formatting tools make it difficult for the ATS to read the document, and they may miss some of your qualifications. And that is not what we want. Also, anything you put in the header or the footer, such as your contact information, won't be read. Put everything in the body of the document. Finally, make sure that you tailor your resume. Applicant tracking systems are looking for the keywords in your resume to find matches. The more you can highlight your relevant skills in your resume, the more likely you are to make it past the computer and to an actual human. And our website has a variety of resources to help you finish and refine your resume. The action verbs list, as someone mentioned earlier, and marketing yourself button on the resumes and more tab are invaluable resources, and that's right up in here. Our optimal resume system with its resume builder module is also a great resource with over 500 sample resumes for you to review. So I guarantee you'll find something interesting in there. You can find our Write a Winning Resume recorded webinar under the Archived Webinars tab, as well as under the Resumes and More tab. And also, there are resources outside of Walden. There are templates in Microsoft Word that you can use in a pinch if you need to. And Live Careers, which is also in your resource list, also has a variety of samples and templates with a builder that you can check out. So there's tons of resources out there for you.